And the final reading's not quite got the whole cast, so can we thank the readers at this point? They've been absolutely brilliant. Really great. Chris, I don't know, why did Chris get picked? He seems like a perfectly lovely chap to me. I don't know why you were deemed appropriate. Your inner Alan Rickman was coming out there, Chris. It was fantastic. Well, it's a great story, isn't it? It's a story to be enjoyed. So do you want to just turn for a minute to someone beside you? What have you been enjoying in the story of Esther? Okay. Just a couple of things to say before we get into this one. The first thing I want to say is to those of you who wouldn't yet call yourself Christians, it's brilliant that you've come this weekend, and it's even more brilliant that you've found this church family. And I guess there might be things that have come up this weekend that you're sort of working through. Feel free to come and grab me during one of the breaks, but there'll be stuff you want to process as you go home. And you know this already, but keep chatting with the folks at church that you've been chatting to. They'd love to help you keep working through where you're at with all of this. And then the other thing I wanted to say, a couple of you asked me about the Persian Empire stuff and the British Museum stuff. Do check that out online. We know a lot about the Persian Empire, actually, because it's not, if you think about when the Roman Empire was, it's not that far before that, the Persian Empire. Some of the details in Esther that you may think sound most exaggerated and eccentric actually check out so well with details that we know about how the Persians operated. So it's fascinating stuff if you want to check that out. There was an older guy who decided he wanted to adopt a child. It's quite a unique thing, adoption, isn't it? Some of you will know that from your own family stories. The parent, by definition, decides to love you, to make you one of their own. So he went into the orphanage. It was one of these old style ones with the cots all the way around the room. Dirty nappy smell lingered. His eyes fell on this particular child. It wasn't that it was especially cute. The child was an ugly little rugrat, to be honest. But the man had decided that this was the one. And the reason it was such a special adoption was because it turned out the kid was from a slave background. The father was a king. What a turnaround in fortunes this child was about to enjoy. God, the Father, and Israel, his son. It's what the whole Bible story is about. A relationship between God and his people, his children. Out of Egypt I called my son. And there were ups and downs in the relationship, partly because of hostility out there, a lot because of wandering hearts in here. The one constant was the character of the father, just relentlessly faithful to his promises, even when he has to send his children into exile because of their own disobedience. God had bound himself permanently in such a way that everything that happens to them ultimately reflected back on him. Promises to the world through the family of Abraham, remember? Exodus, I'm going to rescue you so that you know me, but Pharaoh will know me and the world will see how great and mighty I am. And that's all why what we heard yesterday was so shocking, because a plan to annihilate all the people of God is a plan to annihilate the promises of God, is a plan to annihilate the very character of God. Do you think you know anything about the Lord, Yahweh? Things you feel sure that you trust and love about him? Well, for his precious people to be completely wiped off the planet would throw all you think you know about him into doubt. So, first then, let's enjoy watching deliverance arise, which it surely will. That was the phrase Mordecai used to Esther when he assured her that relief and deliverance would arise for the Jews, even after this grim annihilation order's been declared over them. And you remember we left things on a cliffhanger. Queen Esther's just resolved to confront the king about Haman's evil plan. And she comes into her own now, Esther. She really takes over from Mordecai. She's the main character now. She not mentioned, it seems, to her husband that she was a Jew. And so 5 verse 1, On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. Now, that sounds harmless enough, but we heard in chapter 4, you can't just walk into the king of Persia without an appointment, even when you're his wife. And the incentive to make sure that nobody sneaks in is that if you do, you get executed. It's quite an extreme way to avoid interruptions. But you die for coming in without an appointment, unless when you do, he graciously holds out the scepter. Esther takes the risk, 5 verse 2. And this part of the story, it's like one of those contraptions, where a ball drops down a chute, which spins a wheel, which turns a pulley, which sends a domino falling onto a lever, and this goes on until you capture a mouse or start a car or perform some other task. Each event triggers the next thing. Esther's risk-taking is the trigger. So 5 verse 2, when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. Phew! Means he's in a good mood. Probably means he still fancies her. But it's just one very small hurdle cleared, because verse 3, then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" And then Esther says, "Come to this feast," but when he puts her on the spot over dinner, does she bottle it? She certainly decides to delay. "Come back to another banquet tomorrow," she says. "Bring Haman, and at that feast I'll make known my real request." This is where the action mainly cuts to Haman. Haman the Agagite. What do we think about him, children? Oh, well done. Still awake out there, some of you. He's the prime minister, and all these intimate dinners with the royals make him very happy. And it would. I mean, imagine our king messages you and says, "Come over for dinner." You're thinking, some great banquet. No, just you, Charles, and Camilla. Wow, what an honor. Got to find out what he really thinks about Meghan and Harry, all that stuff. Fantastic. Well, that's how Haman feels. But there's one person who always manages to strike a bum note for Haman. 5 verse 9. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Esther's cousin still not bowing. Urgh. I mean, I know that we've legislated to annihilate all the Jews, but and Haman at this point decides he needs therapy. 5 verse 11 is his therapy. Do you see what his therapy is? His therapy is to get his wife and his friends together and say, "Guys, it would just really make me feel better if I could just talk to you about me for a bit, all I've achieved." So in 5 verse 11, he boasts about his money, his promotions, his number of sons. That's a bit of a weird thing to boast to your wife about, isn't it? I mean, A, she probably knows how many they've got, and B, she probably deserves more of the credit. And if you're imagining being married to that, don't feel too sorry for his wife, because she's Cruella de Vil. Verse 14, his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up reaching a height of 50 cubits and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it." Now, this makes things very tense at this moment, because Haman's off to see the king for permission to hang Mordecai. Meanwhile, Esther has delayed in making her request. Will that turn out to be a costly delay? It's out of her hands now. But it just so happens that the king couldn't sleep that night. We're now in chapter 6, verse 1. He asks them to bring the book of the record of his reign. It's the same therapy as Haman's. And it just so happens in 6 verse 2, they flick to the page about the time a guy called Mordecai saved the king's life. It was a footnote at the end of the first talk, end of chapter 2. You might not even remember it. The day Mordecai uncovers this plot, saves the king. But that was it. It just got noted in a book and they've all forgotten about it. 6 verse 3. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Did we give him a knighthood or an OBE? No. Oh. And in 6 verse 4, Haman just so happens to be in the building. He's come to talk about having Mordecai strung up. The king never knows what to do himself, says, bring in Haman. He'll know what to do to honor Mordecai. And 6 verse 6 is absolutely brilliant, isn't it? 6 verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And we know about Haman's ego. The king's talking about honoring someone. This is where I imagine him as the most pantomime. You know, in the pantomime, how the baddie sometimes has a little quiet word with the audience. So he comes over and says, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Wink. And verse 7 reveals Haman's heart. Did you spot his fantasy? What's Haman's fantasy? Verse 7. Did you see it? For the man the king delights to honor, let them bring a royal robe that the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. What's Haman's fantasy? He wants to be the king. But it's all about to go horribly wrong. Great, says the king. Do all of that for Mordecai the Jew. As Haman runs back to the audience with his hand in his mouth. And it's delicious justice as he gets not the honor but the shame of having to dress his arch enemy and march him through the square in the parade. Now, that's a key moment because momentum has swung against the bad guy and his problems rapidly become terminal. End of chapter 6. He's taken to the banquet. Queen Esther finally tells the king she's a Jew and appeals to him to save her people and unveils the plotter. We're now in chapter 7 and verse 5. 7 verse 5. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy. This vile Haman. Da, da, da. King storms out onto the garden. He's made this irreversible edict. What's he going to do? Walks back in at just the moment from just the angle he's looking at. It looks like Haman is assaulting the queen. That in itself grounds for instant dismissal. And 7 verse 9, this eunuch Harbona, I think Harbona must have been the class telltale at school. You know, sir, he's actually got an impaling pole in his own garden. Just if it's helpful to mention. And in terms of the tension of the whole book, that is the end of the story. We know it's going to be all right for Esther and her people now. Verse 10 of chapter 7, they impaled Haman. 8 verse 1, the king gave the queen the estate of Haman. 8 verse 2, the king took off his signet ring, which he'd reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. And that, children, is how it happened. There just happened to be a gallows, and there just happened to be a sleepless king, and there just happened to be a king who walked in at the right moment, and there just happened to be a queen who just so happened to have been raised into position, who just so happened to be of the same people group, of the people who just so happened to find themselves being delivered from destruction. It's a great story, isn't it? How are we getting to know God better here, though? And are we right to think we can get to know anything about God in a book where his name is never mentioned? Well, I think it's the text itself that drives us to look for a higher power. So we saw they literally rolled the dice to decide government business in Persia. That seems an invitation to ask questions about who or what determines outcomes. Deliverance will arise, that suggestive comment, without ever taking us to a particular place in the Old Testament that proves it. And here's another suggestive comment. I skimmed over it. 6 verse 13, Haman's wife. She might be Cruella de Vil, but she's spot on theologically. 6 verse 13. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you can't stand against him. You will surely come to ruin the Jewish people. If you mess with them, you'll be in trouble. To which Haman might say, well, thanks a lot. You could have told me that before now. But she's right. The Jewish people, still no explicit quotes. It's making us do the work deliberately. But every time they're mentioned, 40 times in Esther, the Jews, it reminds us that these are not just any people. Are there covenants about them and a track record? We've got to do the work. We've got to remember what we know into the situation. So let's make a general observation about God first. Providence. Theologians talk about the doctrine of God's providence. It's about his ongoing relationship with the world he has made in his not just sovereign, but good, purposeful involvement in all the details. So, if God's behind this rise and fall, how many details does that mean he was sovereign over? Well, he was sovereign over the king's drunkenness that meant he sacked his first wife. He was in charge of how good-looking Esther was and the king's liking of her. The mood the king happened to be in when Esther went to see him. The decisions Esther and Mordecai made all the way through this book, for good and for bad. The evil plan to build the execution device. God was behind the sleeplessness of the king that night and the nighttime reading material. And God was somehow in charge of the exact moment and the exact angle the king was looking at when he came back in the room, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. His name's never mentioned. And that's deliberate because it feels like our world. You get no running commentary from the BBC about how Ukraine or Iraq is playing into God's bigger purposes. Persia, by the way, that we're reading about here, that's Iran, the hottest place of conflict on the planet today, under his providence. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision's from the Lord, Proverbs 16. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will, Proverbs 21. You meant evil against me, Joseph to his brothers. God meant it for good. And I know that digs up a whole heap of questions about God's sovereignty, his relationship with evil. The Bible's really clear. God doesn't directly cause evil or sin or take pleasure in them. But if it blows your mind thinking about how God's involvement in the world engages with our involvement, good. It should. The omniscient mind of God. And then this whole tapestry of interconnected events that in the middle of the story, we could never possibly work out how they all weave together or how he's using them. But we can be sure he's using them. We sometimes find God's sovereignty offensive, I think, for a whole host of reasons, maybe cultural partly, to do with the level of control or freedom we've been led to expect over our lives. You know, God's rule over history is meant to be a pastoral comfort. That's how it's presented in the Bible. And it would be a real shame in our generation if this doctrine that's meant to be a comfort saps the joy out of the gospel for us. Because you will need strong beliefs about God's providence as you go through life, the highs and lows of church life together, that in all things, he is working for his glory and our good. We mentioned that at Euston Church, we started meeting in a university classroom. We once got reported to the university because someone complained that I was a hate preacher. And that felt really vulnerable at the time when it seemed like the whole ministry hung on that venue. None of it was outside the providence of God. We never then imagined a time when we wouldn't be able to meet physically as church. New challenges for all the churches in COVID time, weren't there? None of it outside the providence of God. Whatever the latest or the next, perhaps as yet unknown challenge in the life of City Gates Church, he's got it covered. And then deliverance will arise. That's the specific angle on his providence. That means we need the book of Esther. So we may feel uncomfortable with talk of divine decrees and his sovereign hand as if that is a heavy hand. But God asserts his rule in history to the end goal of his people's rescue. Rescue's the golden thread that runs all the way through Scripture. It's what he reigns for. That is the point and the purpose of his control, his glory through your deliverance. And isn't that wonderful? Because it means that if you've got a God who's fully invested in you relationally and fully sovereign over the script, nothing can stop you in that sense. As the story of the rest of the Bible and church history testifies to. Esther's so precious because it says he's not only at work for the deliverance of his people when he's boshing the pharaohs very visibly, he's at work when he goes unnoticed and unmentioned by the powers that seem to call the shots. Esther says he's at work in the coincidences, the mundane decisions of powerful people who think they write history. And he's even at work through the dubious choices of his own children. And I want to be careful how I say that. Not at all to justify the making of dubious choices. See rest of Bible. It's just that don't assume that you'll ever be able to make a single decision, good, bad, indifferent, reckless, or have any compromise kind of track record in your past that God will not be using towards his plan. He is bigger than all of that. Isn't that a relief that he's bigger? I find it personally such a relief that he is bigger than all the choices and actions I've made in my life. Big God. And so, point 3, how are you going to look at the world tomorrow morning? Can I recommend ditching a few isms? No atheism. Just because you've got an explanation in cause and effect doesn't mean he's not writing the script. I wonder, can we Christians function as atheists when we forget to thank him for all the details? No, polytheism. It's not that he's God in Jerusalem and the church, but he's not God in the classroom or at the hospital or the office. No dualism, no battle of equals between good and evil. He's using all the evil towards his good. No deism, that's the God who just winds up the clock and lets it run. No fatalism, no randomism, random's not an ism, no randomness. All of which is to say, don't make big distinctions between natural and supernatural events. Or speak of secular spaces as if they're not all his spaces. Or speak of divine intervention or God moments as if they're not all God moments. Don't think about his big plan as if that's unconnected from him working it out in the detail. It's not that he's God of the future, but not God of now. I mentioned North Korea. If you're there in one of those prison camps this weekend looking at the guards, every mood, every neuron of their brain, every sound from the PA desk. But in those camps, every executive order they make, every prison governor, it's all under the government of God. And then you, wherever you're going to be tomorrow morning, your teacher, your supervisor, the mood they're in when you see them this week, something that gets decreed tomorrow that knocks on in effect onto you, he's sovereign over that script too. So when the powerful people seem to be writing history, and when they don't seem to tolerate the gospel, and when you think it will all go horribly wrong if you're a little bit bolder, who do we think is running this show? Do you think that just because a lot of people in Britain don't talk about him, that God's plan won't be achieved? Do you think that suddenly he's changed his mind about his precious children? It's story resolution time here. We still live in the middle of our deliverance story, but there's no suspense about the outcome. So sorry if you like a cliffhanger. This is total spoiler alert. Your ending is this. Your ending is that you will spend all eternity, that's longer than 180 days, by the way, all eternity, delighting in the presence of the real God King, who only ever acts and loves for the good of his bride. You're heading to the King's feast, people of God. That's your ending. It's the best ending. So keep being the different ones and stay bold. You are no fool to trust him during your time in exile, because relief and deliverance, the Lord's got it covered. So pray. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable his judgments, and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him, and through him, and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen.